right, so as I get the third speaker ready, Mr. Prashant Yadav, who is the Director of Healthcare Research at the University of Michigan's Williamson-Davidson Institute and a faculty at the Ross School of Business. A leading expert on healthcare supply chains in developing countries, he advises global leaders, policymakers, and developing country governments on healthcare supply chains. He serves on the advisory board of many global development organizations, including... So we were doing this issue on finance, and we desperately had to get in touch with Dr. Amit Verma. Of course, we called, and he didn't pick up the phone, and then we called again, he didn't pick up the phones, and then we were like, see, he's not picking up the phone. Then my colleague called him at our afternoon time, and Dr. Verma picked up the phone, and only then did we realize he was in New York in the middle of the night sleeping. Now, being such a sweetheart that he is, not once did he say, why did you call, why I'm not here. He's like, I'm not in India, but when I'm back, I will definitely be available for an interview. So that is Dr. Verma for us, always helpful. And then once that we knew that he's helpful, of course we went back and back and back. So just to let you know, we'll keep coming to you all the time. And now this is this introduction to you. Dr. Amit Verma is a managing partner of Quadri Capital, which is a US $300 million healthcare-focused private equity fund that invests in healthcare sectors across South and Southeast Asia. He also spearheaded India Build-Out Fund, a US $100 million healthcare and education-focused domestic private equity fund. Dr. Verma has over 20 years of private equity, strategic and operational leadership, and board-level experience in healthcare organizations across USA, Asia, and Australia. A renowned critical care medicine physician, he continues to practice as a critical care physician on a part-time basis. He is also on the editorial board and a member of various healthcare and management groups and societies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amit Verma with a louder applause.
Good afternoon. I hope I'm audible, and I always get scared with these kind of formal introductions. It makes me very nervous that now she's built it up so much and you're going to get so disappointed. Good afternoon once again. My name is Amit Verma, and I really want to thank Cosmac for getting me up here. It's a very eclectic session, and the kind of talks that one is getting used to is very, very different from what we normally do. So kudos to you guys for putting this together. The topic that I was given was how to prepare for private equity, and I wanted to start off first is how many of you are actually looking for any infusion of capital? Can I get a show of hands of how many people? I see Vivek wants equity, and here I was trying to flip it on him, asking him for equity. But let me break up my talk into a couple of things. I realize this is a very diversified audience, and I want to make sure that we cater to all whims and fancies. So I thought we break it up into a couple of things. Number one, let's talk about, I'm a healthcare guy, so I'll obviously be focused on healthcare. I want to talk about the larger context of what's happening in healthcare today. I want to talk about how a private equity fund is structured. And then finally, I want to end up talking about what is a private equity person looking for in a company, and what should the company be looking for in private equity. So that's the entire talk. I'll keep it, try and keep it short so there's enough time left for Q&A. So my topic was preparing for private equity. My view is why my topic should be, why is it the best time in the world to be a healthcare entrepreneur? Because to my mind, it's not about me being excited and passionate about what I do. I clearly believe that we are at the cusp of this huge revolution in healthcare. Now, I talked about the fact that there is a fundamental shift in the way we are practicing healthcare, at least in this part of the world. The government and the private sector are developing new systems of measuring efficacy. This never used to happen. The fact earlier used to be, get a patient in, get a patient out, try not to kill them in between. I should start off with one disclaimer. I am a doctor, so I'm allowed to make fun of doctors, so I will be doing that. And I am a very rude person by nature, so you will be hearing a lot of non-kosher comments, so please bear with me. More importantly, new payment models are evolving, so that's changing, and you see insurance companies scrambling right now to figure out unique ways of saying no to TPA-generated bills. So they are trying to figure out how to say no. We have hospitals, insurers have stronger incentives now to come together. From my perspective, new funding sources are coming through, and you need to be aware of the traditional of going in, pledging your company, getting a bank to give you loan, getting family, friends, charitable institutions to give you money. That era is over. And more importantly, there is this new paradigm of, I just call them middle class. I don't know what the definition means. To me, healthcare and education in Asia means that you will do whatever it takes to get the best. So if you have to put your kids through school, you figure out ways of doing it. If you have to pay for healthcare, you will sell your farm and house, it gets done. So I don't know whether it means new middle class. What I do know is that there is this huge segment of population which is willing to pay for private healthcare. Now I'm a big fan of human development indices, and I'm not saying it's the best thing that exists. I'm a bit sick and tired of gloating over how India is overtaking China and the GDP rate. At the end of the day, if you look at their real notional incomes, it's very disparate. It's going to take us 25 years of growing at the same rate before we even reach where they are today. But I think what we should be looking at is things like longevity. We should be looking at literacy, and GDP comes at the end. And if I just look at longevity as one metric, and there are many metrics that we can use to figure out how well we are doing, we rank pretty low. We are 115. So let's stop gloating and let's start talking about the problem or what we need to do. I want to stay focused on Asia because we are an Asian private equity firm. And very interestingly, as I go across investing across South and Southeast Asia, the language, the cuisine, the religion, everything changes country to country. The problems in healthcare are remarkably similar. So the issues are the same. Lack of infrastructure, lack of doctors, lack of paying capacity, how do you get access, how do you bring in digital technology, all of this stuff is the same, nothing has changed. And that's why we thought that we'll put together an outfit which can invest in the region. We've kept away from China, and I'll talk about Quadria in the later few slides, but I just want you to understand that there is some method to madness of trying to be an Asian healthcare fund. But let's talk about the problem, and some of it may be repetitive to the audience over here, but I do want to focus on a few key highlights, and it's very important for you to understand that by 2020, Asia will be spending $2.9 trillion, which is equivalent to the combined spend of US and Europe today. So we keep hearing about how much US and Europe is spending. This is what we will be spending in 2020, 5 years from now. Number two, while we have only 30% of the world's population, we have 40% of the disease burden. 40%. I mean, we are talking now huge numbers. And unfortunately, most of it is moving towards chronicity. So you have lifestyle diseases. Once upon a time, it was very common for our part of the world to die of acute infectious diseases, diarrheas, malaria. I'm not saying that's gone away. But lifestyle diseases like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, pollution-related kidney issues have now come to fore. The downside is that if you're a diabetic or a hypertensive, you are a patient for life, which means we need to build a whole ecosystem around you to take care of you right from the beginning to the end. And that's what's changing this industry. The second is that when I look at private equity and funding, if you look on the right side, unfortunately this pointer isn't working on the right slide, but having said this, if you look at the blue at the bottom, that's where most of the funding is coming in. And this is where we see the potential. If you look at the green, that's where we think our opportunity lies of providing investment. The global healthcare market is undergoing a fundamental shift. The center of gravity for healthcare is shifting from the west and shifting to the east. So one of the questions I keep getting asked, why did you come back and why do you think you believe in doing this? I believe in doing this because to my mind, in my lifetime, I will see centers of excellence go from the west and come to the east. The amount of growth that is taking place, and it's reflected on the left side of this, is that while the US and Europe and the developed part of the world is growing at maybe 1 or 2%, the CAGR here in Asia is about 15%. So take any healthcare company, leave them alone, they will still grow at 15% year on year. Next, if I look at healthcare expenditure and I grow across the lower part of this market, nobody is spending the amount of effort that we need to do. You must be aware of India's indices when it comes to doctors, when it comes to beds, when it comes to nursing ratios. we are even below World Health Organization standards, which by the way is not rocket science. So at the end of the day, we are low at every single metric. Why is that so? Because we've never spent money on healthcare. And if you look at the amount of spend that we have, even now, it is pitiable. India is planning on spending 2% this year. What's changing is on the top upper left. There is a large, rapidly growing aging population. So we are living longer. We have found unique ways of keeping people alive. I am an intensivist. I can tell you today that if you came brain dead into my ICU, I can guarantee you can keep you alive for many, many weeks. I cannot assure you that you're going to walk out with no morbidity or mortality, but I can guarantee you can keep the bill chucking along for a very, very long time. And that's something which is very scary, because you're reaching the stage now where medicine and science has reached a certain point where I can keep the body going. I may not assure you of the best outcomes. Number two, there's this increasing affluence and rising middle class, and I call them the Google class. Because these are the guys who show up in your offices. They would have reams of information, they would have read something about it, they will tell you how they should be treated, and most importantly, the behavior pattern that has now changed, that I'm paying you. So you need to make sure that whatever you do is absolutely right. Now, most of the times, I think as a doctor, we've gotten away with a lot of murderous things. The whole idea of talking to a patient was foreign to us. We're finally getting used to the fact that patients do have rights. But that doesn't mean that we go to the other extreme. But this rising middle class is what is changing consumption patterns and is changing the way medicine gets paid for. I already alluded to the bottom left, which is the high incidence of chronic diseases. And I think if we were just to do the math across the region on what chronic diseases are going to cost us, those are mind-boggling numbers. And finally, there is not a single country in this region, not a single, where I know that a government can pay for healthcare. So they are very dependent on the private sector paying and taking care of healthcare. So let me give you an example. In this country, 70% of patient care is done in the private sector, while the private sector only has 30% of the infrastructure. So we are now talking about the growing incidence, what used to be earlier nursing home clusters, now becoming smaller hospitals, which will increasingly become regional networks, and finally large corporatized entities that you see in the West. So that's the paradigm shift that's taking place. I mean, I can keep talking about Asia's benefit, and I told you that I believe the center of gravity will change. I know there's a significant cost advantage for clinical trials. You've heard this before. We know that Asia has an increasing share in global researchers, and that's by the quality of science that we're producing over here today. We are increasing share in global R&D expenditure. You don't know of any large multinational today, whether it's pharma or in medical tech or medical consumables, which does not have an Asia office anymore. So we may still be only maybe 2-3% of the global revenues, but they are beginning to invest in the future. And they're not doing it for charity, as you can imagine. They're doing it because they also believe that in the next 10 years, if they are not big in Asia, they're never going to succeed. And finally, we do believe that as we are getting smarter about how we roll out our businesses, we are going to get more attractive to large pharma. But let me pull you back to investing. I still believe, and I have data to prove, that healthcare companies have grown faster than any other sector. I also know that contrary to popular belief, and when you read the Economic Times, it tells you how the Vishal Baris have invested money in many parts of the world at such astronomical numbers, I still believe that the healthcare valuations are lower than other sectors. And finally, there's a very low correlation between growth and how we add value. Now, what I do believe is different is that to succeed in healthcare investments, you need to understand the sector. And domain expertise, rightly or wrongly, in this sector will define whether you will succeed both when we invest and you succeed as an entrepreneur. And that's why we see a lot of disparate valuations across the region. So if I go from acute care to multi-geography acute care, I am seeing a lot of growth and investments taking place. Just briefly about Quadres, so you understand that when I make these comments, where am I coming from? As mentioned, we're a $350 million fund. We invest in South and Southeast Asia. I'm a growth capital provider. So what it means is that I'm not betting on that one molecule which is going to cure cancer. I'm not betting on greenfield, buying greenfield plots and trying to build hospitals. Basically, you need to be a company which has a business model that is working. You may be marginally profitable or just about to reach profit. We will help you take you to the next stage, which means that we will put in growth capital. We will grow you from where you are. Usually if it's a hospital, I'll take you from a single hospital. Hopefully together we will grow to a regional network and make ourselves attractive to the market. We invest in 4 things. We invest in healthcare delivery, which is hospitals. We invest in life sciences. I already mentioned to you, I'm not doing innovation, I'm not doing trials. So we invest in generic life science companies. We do medical technology and consumables, and we look at healthcare retail, so diabetes clinics, nephrology clinics, eye clinics, the like. But I think it's very important, and those of you who have had some exposure to private equity firms, everybody will come and tell you their mantra for success and why they invest. From my perspective, our core investing philosophy is based on just 4 principles. These are actually basics, and when I finish with this, you look at me saying, I mean, should I really be accepting money from this idiot? Because what he's talking is reasonably simple, but let me share with you our philosophy. Our philosophy is very clear. Number 1, invest in fundamentals. So invest in the sector. Don't invest in a trend. Just because a country is doing well, doesn't mean every sector is going to do well. So invest in the sector, that's why we only do healthcare. Number 2, we are hands-on providers. So if you are looking for pure capital and wish that this guy goes away, we're not going to be it. We believe in operating value. We believe that we have a team which can work with you in a partnership to take you to the next level that we spoke about. So operating value to us is a core thesis. Number 3 is invest, as I said, in growth capital. So we are not early venture, we are not betting on an idea, and I'm not looking at it. They had not discussed what the exit mechanisms are going to be. Exits in our world can only happen 3 ways. Number 1, you sell your company to a larger strategic. So somebody comes and buys you out, you get your value. Number 2, you time the market. So you take it IPO, everybody makes money and you decide how many shares you want to sell. And the third in our parlance is called a trade sale, where you sell your stake to another private equity. If you look at all the 3, this needs to get defined right up front. So now you as an entrepreneur take a decision. I will never sell to a strategic. Let's agree that up front. So at least I know what my options are to get out. That is something that I don't see enough of, and that's where we get into trouble. What we provide is nothing unique. Basically, it's about value identification, and I'll talk about this a bit later. We talk about value creation together. And finally, value realization. So, I mean, if I'm a private equity firm, you know I'm in on a fixed runway. I'm not in for the next 10, 15 years. Unlike you, who's an entrepreneur. I know I'm going to exit in the next 5, 6 years. So let's agree, why be shy about this? And how we're going to make our money together is something, let's be clear. So once you know I need to exit, you need to provide for the fact that I'm going to leave. We need to figure out these things together. And this is a very complex chart. But this is part of my due diligence process, and the reason to show this to you is to tell you that a diligence process in private equity can last anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and the logic behind that is pretty simple. I want to do the hard work with the company before I put a single dollar in. So what we'll do is it takes me 3 to 6 months to do a diligence. At the end of the 3 to 6 months, we will end up with a common business plan. The business plan basically, and again to decodify it without getting into details, is 4 things. What is the kind of revenue we'll achieve together in the next 5 years? Number 2, what kind of operating margin efficiencies we can build in, so what kind of terminal EBITDA values we are looking at. Number 3, if you have your P&L, how can we help you make it smarter? So there are ways of doing that, so that's asset efficiency. But the key is the 4th element, which is here at the end. It is managing human expectations. What is it that we're looking in the partnership? How do we strengthen HR? Do we have an ESOP policy or not? How do we ensure that the growth and the gain that we have actually percolates down to companies? This color coding that you see, and unfortunately is not coming out well, is basically single line items defining every single position and every single role, and more importantly, every single thing that we can do in the company. What usually ends up happening is that we come up with maybe 5 to 10 things that we think that we can help you fix in a company. We identify those things, we agree on a plan. As soon as we sign up on the business plan, we are done, we make the investment. After that, it's about monitoring, and so that we don't squabble on annual budgets and talk about the fact that, it should have been this much, why are we charging so much? All of that is taken care of right in the beginning. So then let's talk about what goes into investing. I alluded to this earlier, but let me re-emphasize. My view is that medicine is drastically changing. The economics of how we do healthcare is going through a fundamental shift. The earlier belief that because I am a doctor, I understand the business and I know hospitals are run is all bunkum. Because clinical insight is no longer sufficient. Just because you think you know it or it's your gut feel, and we have all been accused of this in the past, that my gut says so. My gut doesn't say anything. My gut finally needs to believe data, and that's what's changing. And for us to make any kind of difference, we need proof of clinical efficacy, we need a sustainable economic model, a willing buyer finally, and most importantly, managing the team to make sure that all of us gain. Tomorrow's hospitals will need to be fundamentally different, and I think you'll hear from a lot of speakers going forward of how they're changing the market. So whether it's home care solutions, people like Arjun who are bringing in different models of telemedicine and teleradiology, how labs are changing, we heard some of that earlier on, how personalized medicine will come into play. I think the era of practicing 1940s medicine is long gone. And the sooner we shift, the better it's going to be for all of us. But I do believe that most healthcare professionals, and that's the part where I said I am going to be rude, is that I do not believe can succeed as healthcare innovators or, more importantly, healthcare entrepreneurs. Because the way we have been trained classically is the wrong way. We've all learned. Anybody who's gone through an Indian medical college will tell you it's about ratta and making sure that you can puke it out the next morning and get it out of the way. There is no insight. Nobody teaches you anything. I mean, I remember when I was going through my medicine, nobody taught me CPR till I was an intern. As an intern, I did my first CPR on a live patient. That's crazy. I mean, how do you practice medicine like this anymore? But most importantly, we as clinicians are not taught any economics. So whatever we pretend to know, or when we are running our own businesses, is all we just made it up. We don't understand payments, we don't understand cost, and more importantly, we don't understand business model. That's because, as I said, it's hierarchical training, it's poor hospital management, the reimbursement is a mess. A lot of times, most of our payments are stuck. Some of it is our fault because we don't do proper billing. Again, nobody's taught us about proper billing, and that's why it gets stuck. But also, it's the fact that this is how the system works, and most of you who rely on the CGHs and the ECHs of the world know exactly what I'm talking about. That it's pretty hard to get your own money back. And lastly, there is this growing fear of liability and the fact that you're going to either get sued or be accused of lack of compassionate care, or most importantly, lack of scientific care. Now, our belief, and you can challenge me on that, is that a specialized private equity firm can help you move to the next stage of business, because this is something that we do. So what can private equity do for you? And this is not a plug for private equity, so please bear with me on this, but it could be any source of investment. They're basically 4 things. You provide the money, obviously, so that's capital contribution. You then talk about the value add strategy that I've been continuously harping about, that you need to be able to bring value. And if I cannot bring value to your company, then I should not be investing in your company, because this is a partnership. It's not about me providing you a loan. It's about how we can take it to the next step. Strategic alignment is about building the company's positioning. So you need to decide who do you want to be. Are you going to be a single standalone best-in-class player? Am I going to go to tier 2, tier 3 cities? Am I going to have a network of hospitals? Am I going to be centers of excellence? Am I going to do just multi-specialty care? I think this brand positioning component, the number 3 on strategy, is something that has become very, very important. And also, you cannot live in isolation. So collaborations need to get done. They could be with medical device suppliers, they could be with pharma, they could be with other regional chains, they could be with diagnostics, but this is something that needs to now come into play. And finally, as I keep talking about, at the end of the day, you as an entrepreneur need to make money, I as a private equity firm need to make money, so we need to talk about our value realization. For those of you who have not gone through the pain of trying to get an investor, this is what this sheet looks like. This is what happens. These are the various steps that take place. So an entrepreneur who's beginning to look for money will then appoint an advisor, contact PE firms, get into initial inquiries and negotiations. The entrepreneur of PE, and I've alluded to this also, will meet to discuss business plan, build relationships, negotiate. We finally get into what is called the due diligence. And again, apologies to those who have gone through this. It's a very, very painful process because you bring in your legal experts, you bring in your commercial, you get in your finance guys, you get your accounting audits done. Because at the end of the day, who is a private equity firm? A private equity firm is someone who accepts third-party money, takes the money on their behalf, invests it forward. The guys who have given you the money are wanting a certain return. So you need to make sure that who you invest in are kosher and people that you can finally be able to rely on. So that's very, very important. And lastly, you come to the final negotiation, which is and completion, and then the monitoring process starts. Now monitoring could be light touch, heavy touch. Most of us will insist that we will join the board. Most of us will insist that we will have a say in how you spend capex money or project money. So we will insist on that. We will have a right on senior hiring and firing. So the notion that you could go out and fire anybody kind of disappears. We will have a lien on your loans. So any kind of borrowing that you do over and above an agreed business plan, we will have rights on those. And finally, we will have some rights on ensuring that the exit plan, so whether you come along with us, you allow us to do a strategic sale, allow us to go to market, is all enshrined in these documents. And this then becomes what we say is a final agreement, and then life goes on. So let me give you an example of what do I mean by a monitoring process for one of my investing companies. Once a month, which is usually the 10th of every month, we will meet at the hospital with the entire management company and do a complete review. The complete review is basically 3 hours. It talks about OPEX, so it talks about the current operations for the month and how does it follow the business plan. It talks about projects, ongoing projects and the spend and what's going on there. It talks about any branding or reputational issues. And finally, it opens out any other kinds of debates. I don't go around meeting individual departments, but I will meet with individual doctors to get a 360 view of what the management is telling me is within the realm of what I'm hearing. And lastly, every quarter we will have a final review and talk about it, but that doesn't mean that we will be sitting there in your offices telling you what to do. I do insist on one thing, and that is I get an SMS every night. It tells me what was the occupancy of the hospital, how many patients were admitted, what kind of cash collections were done, what was the OT utilization. But that's me. Maybe I'm being a lot more obsessive than I should be. But that's our style of functioning. And those are the kind of now device changes and more importantly requirements of monitoring that I want. So if you're an entrepreneur, on the right hand side you see various types of names. So get used to these kinds of things. Buyout funds, which basically want to buy out your entire company, fire the management, or maybe keep 1 or 2 elements and run the company on their own. Venture funds, which are basically early and late stage, so you're just beginning and we provide you capital. Fund of funds, which are funds which invest in other private equity funds, so they are one step further removed. Sector focus funds, so we kind of fit into that category. Distressed debt is somebody that now you've gotten into cash flow situations and we provide you financing. And lastly, mezzanine, and this is again a way of finding you funding. So we are kind of growth capital, so we are somewhere in between sector focused fund and I would say late stage venture funding. That's what we do. Most of you would either be hitting venture funds or be going for growth capital funds. So if I were an entrepreneur, these were the various check marks that I would have. I would ask these questions. What is my stage of company? What is the amount do I need? So please only get as much money that you are willing to swallow. One of the biggest mistakes I see is that people ask for way too much money. They don't know what to do with the money, and more importantly, they have given up valuable equity. You don't want to give up your sweat and blood to a private equity firm too soon. Which industry sector you operate in, amount of financing required, geographic location, that's very, very important because the kind of funds that may get attracted to you will depend on where you are. The value additive ability, and I keep coming back to this, that the era of just getting somebody to come and invest with you, give you money and move on is long gone. You need somebody to come and not just give you money, but more importantly, help you in getting to the next stage. And finally, an openness towards hands-on or hands-off. So I think re-emphasize this whole notion of partnership, and I'll continue to do so as we go forward. And then, what is private equity looking for in a business? So these are my quick things. Number one is ethics. At the end of the day, you're shaking hands, and regardless of whatever I put in any documentation, and if it ever needs to go to legal, it's pretty much over. The relationship is over, and more importantly, the business is short. Did I switch this off? Okay. The second is that I want realistic business planning. Don't show me the moon. I'm not asking for it. I mean, at the end of the day, we've also invested, so we understand what is realistic and what's an Excel sheet. The third is, once we've agreed on a business plan, let's go ahead and operationalize it. Let's not just talk theory. So then the execution abilities of what has been promised need to be maintained. Require intense sanity in projects. Don't tell me that you'll be building 10 hospitals at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, nobody can, nobody should, and nobody will. So let's not build that into a plan. Good corporate governance, and this is something for private companies which has become very, very important. Regardless of whether you ever hit the market or not, your reputation and your credibility finally comes down. So the era of stocking up your boards with your wife and your brother and sister is going. You need to start, even if you don't want to follow the company law board, you will have to make sure that you have independent board members, and also try and find board members who raise their voices in board meetings. Don't make it a one-sided debate. Ability to hear bad news without getting defensive, and that's something I face quite a lot. As soon as I tell a private entrepreneur that, I don't think you're doing this right, hackles go up. The first debate, what do you mean you're talking about? You telling me I've been doing this for 30 years, you weren't even bloody born when I started doing this business. All of those things come up because at the end of the day, somebody looking outside into your business may pick up a few snippets or may have had some experience which may add value to you. So the ability to listen is important. And lastly, don't give sudden shocks. So you're not going to be meeting your budget, share it up front. Don't wait for the last month and say, guess what, EBITDA is going to be short by 40% this year. And those are the kind of things where the monitoring and stuff comes into play. And to our mind, if we can reach a synergy, what I showed you in the slide previously and what this slide is right now, I think we are pretty much done. So finally, and that's my last slide, this is who we are. We want to build great companies. We want to become the investor of choice in healthcare. And the last line is our ethos: to create value by benefiting the greater good for regional development. It is possible to be good and do good for yourselves. Thank you very much for your time.
We'll take 2 questions for Dr. Verma. Anyone in the audience?
Hi, I'm Dr. Pankaj Gupta. Wonderful talk.
Thank you.
My question is very simple. Usually investors, when they look at healthcare, as a vertical as compared to any other industry vertical. They, sort of the investment period or the horizon that they're looking at is usually the same. But healthcare, as we know, the gestation time is much longer and the returns come slower than you can expect as compared to any other industry. So what's your thought on that?
Pankaj, thank you for that question, and it's a very relevant one. So let me address it two ways. Number one, healthcare to me is infrastructure. So anybody who is expecting Snapdeal type valuations, you should be investing in healthcare. This is brick and mortar industry. Return of capital is usually in the double digits. IRRs that you can get in this kind of investment, which is investment of return, should be around 20% north. Anything lower than that, we shouldn't be talking about it. Standard healthcare companies should be delivering mid-20 EBITDAs. And if you want to make money in this industry, you should be looking at staying from 5 to 8 years. Anybody, and that's the reason why I'm plugging for sector-specific funds as partners, is because then you're going to be dealing with people these four things I just told you. There is no sector agnostic fund that I know is going to come and tell you the same thing because their horizon will be very short. So you're absolutely right. Healthcare takes time, but I know healthcare can deliver value and healthcare can make money. You need to be patient and you need to work with people who understand the business so they don't put undue pressure just for the sake of numbers. So to re-emphasize, 5 to 8 years investment horizon, infrastructure type returns, work with a partner who understands what you are saying so the English is same. And finally, be patient, you'll make it.
That's the last question.
Dr. Verma, my name is Ajit Yadav. I, in a way, belong to the world you're talking about, which is the corporate world, but deep into the healthcare. I understand where you're coming from in terms of what you look for and particularly seeking a role in creating operating value. And I know why you're saying it. But the question that you would really ask is, given the stage or the phase of the industry today, where you will, since you've been hearing, there will be entry points for a larger number of, let's say, start-offs. In that context, does it not make a compelling business case for you? By all means, seek your safety walls, but at the same time, come at the what you call the venture fund entry points as well.
So,
and two, in a similar way, that philosophically speaking, or a strategic point of view, do you seek any range from 10 to 26, or you go beyond that when you invest on those norms having been ticked off?
So I'll answer the second question first. Number one, I always look for significant equity. So I'll always do significant minority, which is the mid-20s position, all the way up to majority. So that's one. Number two, I don't believe in 5-10% investments. It's a waste of your time and my time. Number two, the reason I don't do venture is that I believe the skill set that is needed is very different. When you do venture, you need to have the ability, I'm talking about myself, is to have the ability to look into the future. And I'm very limited in my approach. I'm good at what I do. I am not very good at betting on ideas, and I think where entrepreneurs such as yourselves who are probably starting out and looking for value is not going to be from guys like me who understand brick and mortar. You're looking for people who are far smarter, who understand trends, who understand sectors, who understand how to roll out and build companies. So the skill sets are very different. I somehow believe that to do venture, you don't have to be as sector focused, or you do not have to have that kind of deep expertise as long as I can add value to your venture. So you will become the domain guy and you'll work with me if I'm a venture fund to provide you the safety net or providing you the capital, giving you the framework, telling you about guidelines, getting the legal thing. So I'll do the rest of the things. Versus what I do is very different, that I'm going to get into your business and say, how do I scale you? So my limited point is that there is a very different skill set. I don't think growth guys should do venture and vice versa.
Thanks, Dr. Verma. Would I request Ms. Sen to give a comment to Mr. Verma, please?
It's an interesting point. Ms. Sen and I have worked very closely together for many, many years. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sen, and thank you, Dr. Verma. We will go on with